isn't necessarily go there, but we'll get quizzes like this again. And in a way, the finals and the midterms are a lot like this. The point of this course is for you to learn to recognize, well, certain works of art. Not all the works of art in existence. There are 25 works of art that I want you to know. There are 25 artists I want you to know. Their links are on that syllabus. And we'll talk about them again, particularly next week. And then certain stories. These are 3 of the stories that you will need to know. Now, if you didn't know them today, that's okay. You'll get a chance to learn them. That's what this is about. And you'll learn what the stories is. But does anyone know this particular work of art or the story? Yeah.
David and Goliath.
Goliath's not there, but David. Now, some pictures Goliath is there, even if it's only his head. But David and Goliath. Now, if you haven't heard the story of David and Goliath, maybe you have, probably you have, but we'll read the story of David and Goliath. And it's by a particular artist during the late Renaissance, early Baroque. So that's his particular version of it. Probably the more famous version is Michelangelo's David. We'll see that again. But again, also, how is this different from Michelangelo's David? If you know that, again, we'll see. This one is dynamic, right? He's in the middle of his slingshot throw, right? He's winding up, like a pitcher winding up the throw. His face, his chin is outthrust, biting his lip. He's not entirely nude. He's got a funny little drapery. He's got a little bag to hold stuff with. He's got his armor. Perhaps you notice this, the armor that he's supposed to wear is just lying there unused. So different elements are in this statue than it would be like in Michelangelo's David, which if you haven't seen, we'll talk about it. And so that's another thing you're going to be aware of, how different artists take different moments. Like we said last time, art is a moment of reality interpreted. This is one moment of that story interpreted. And the thing you're going to pay attention to is what makes this work of art different. And well, we'll talk more about other issues about better and stuff like that. So good, that's this one. Maybe. Don't worry if you didn't know it. You have your chance to learn it. This one, what's this? What's this called? Yes?
That's Mary holding Jesus after he was taken down from the cross.
And do you know what it's called? It has a name.
Crucifixion.
No, crucifixion is when he's still on the cross. It's part of the crucifixion story, which is what we call the passion. Passion means not passion like love. Passion means suffering. Ooh, I don't know why we turned it into love and stuff like that. So it's part of that story. We'll look at all the parts of that story.
I'm mad that I do know that. I just forget.
Yeah, there's a particular name, Michelangelo again. His statue is the most famous version of the dead Jesus and Mary. Everybody know what Michelangelo's version is called? But it applies to this as well. The Pietà. Pietà, which means piety, which means love, religious faith, different words like that. So this is a Pietà. That's the name of this story, part of the crucifixion story, which we also call the Passion. And Michelangelo is again the most famous. This is just another version, Dead Christ and Mary. Now, how do you know this is the Dead Christ and Mary? Well, and if you don't know the elements, we'll talk about it again. We got sort of, obviously, it's probably the cross back here. Mary wearing blue is common. Jesus was got the wound in his side, got the wounds from the crown of thorns, mostly naked, as he would have been. Her mostly draped as she has, but the way her hands are clutching him, the way he's clearly dead. That's this particular artist's version of it. Okay? And we'll learn the real story and its importance if you haven't already. This one? Anyone? Yeah.
Perseus and the head of Medusa.
Perseus and the head of Medusa. So Medusa has hair of snakes. You can't really see them very well. This is gore dripping out of her cut off neck. So there's like guts and things like that. Perseus got his little winged helmet, winged feet, a sword hiding from this particular angle, his genitals. From other angles you can see them. And he's just standing on her dead body. Here's her dead body with again gore pouring out of her neck. So again, it's another moment from that story. If you don't know the story, well, there are other versions, including the most famous version, which maybe you've seen currently as a major motion picture. Clash of the Titans. Anyone? No? No. A few years ago, Liam Neeson is Jupiter, Zeus. The guy who plays Voldemort as Hades. You will learn it if you don't know it already, so don't worry about it. And there will be other pictures we'll show with different elements of that story. And Wrath of the Titans, Clash of the Titans takes that story and twists it all in weird directions too. But that's that story. So that's one of the things we're doing, learning these stories. We'll be reading these stories. and learning how different artists have chosen them. And some of the important works of art, more famous versions, you should remember, study. And others just you'll recognize by unknown artists. You know, the first two by known famous artists, the little one less famous. But we'll do that. Any questions about the quiz? So again, I'll just look at the quiz to sort of see how you can describe things, what your level is, what you're observing. And that's one of the skills you should be developing, just observation, looking at things, and writing down what you see. Which is a big part of life, right? It's a big part of life, just looking at stuff and writing down stuff. Yeah.
What was the name of the second one again?
Pietà. P-I with a accent that goes that way. What do I do? P-I-A-T-A. I forget where the accent is. Pietia. Piousness. We'll cover it again. So don't worry about that. Okay. So another thing to look at, well, take out your annotated Mona Lisa book. So the Mona Lisa, one of the most famous pictures. Now, there's no story to go with Mona Lisa. What kind of painting do we call this? A portrait. Right. A picture of a person. Often from the chest upwards, sometimes just the face, sometimes full body. Sometimes portrait includes several people, but it's the point of the picture is to show someone. Who does it show? Everyone, 1, 2, 3.
Mona Lisa.
Who's Mona Lisa? No one. No, because we don't know. He painted somebody. Now, the annotated Mona Lisa means annotations are notes on pictures. And actually, this is only one of the pictures that's really annotated. So I told you, look at the cover of your book, right? So let's look at the annotation for who is she? What does it say? Who is she? You got the book. If you got it. Not look at the neighbors, whatever. Yeah.
Most likely historical non-entity.
Non-entity, nobody. But it also says the name.
Probably Florence merchant Francesco del Giocondo's wife.
Yeah, so sometimes called La Gioconda. That was a trivia question I had 2 weeks ago. I sometimes play trivia, Tuesday night bar trivia. La Gioconda, the wife of a guy named Giocondo. Gondo, men, women in Italy. But we don't know for sure. Nobody really famous or important. Like Perseus has a whole bunch of stories about him. David has a whole bunch of stories about him. Jesus, obviously important. Nobody in pain. So why is this picture famous? What did you see here? What get some examples, or your own reasons?
Well, I was gonna, one of the reasons why the painting got famous because it got stolen.
Which is not mentioned here, but yes, that's one reason we got famous. Got stolen. One of the museum workers put it in his bucket, snuck it out, had it for a couple years before they got it back again. Yeah.
It's famous because it was painted by somebody who had his hands in a lot of different pots.
So Leonardo da Vinci is one of the most famous men of the Renaissance, of the High Renaissance, which we'll talk about. We'll cover this next week, or the week after. 3 famous artists, in age ordered: Leonardo, Michelangelo, Raphael, although Raphael dies young. But these are the you see of course these names are more famous, why? Along with Donatello. Everyone, 1, 2, 3, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. There's a cultural critic, he likes to think he knows culture, and one day he heard his kids outside playing ball, and they were yelling at each other names, hey Leonardo, hey Donatello, hey Raphael, and he thought, oh my kids know, he obviously didn't teach them, my kids know the great artists in the Renaissance, and of course it was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. That shows how much he knew his kids. I knew it, I knew what my kids were up to. Playing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. But he's one of those famous Renaissance artists, and he did a lot of different things, and Mona Lisa is one of the things he did. Okay? Something else from the card. Just pick, it's right there. You just pick it out. What else? Someone else, something else. Another little detail right here. Yeah?
Before Mona, paintings were, was that Frescosis?
Where are you? Which one?
Before Mona.
What's the word you're stuck on?
Frescoes.
Oh, frescoes.
Frescoes on walls, miniatures, or panels on furniture. After framed easel paintings to hang on a wall. That's an interesting little detail. Frescoes is where you take plaster, smear it on the wall, and paint into it before it dries. The paint, of course, seeps into the plaster, so it has staying power, at least as long as the plaster is attached. Any of you ever had plaster fall off a wall or ceiling? Plaster in my ceiling fell off once in my bedroom at home. Well, I said, that looks like it's about to fall. I said, get out of the way. Whomp, it almost hit her in the head. Plaster doesn't always stick. But if you paint on it, the paint seeps in and it lasts pretty well. But this was, and this is a common mistake you'll see in movies and things. You'll see in movies that it's wrapped up like on a canvas, an oil canvas, then you know, oh, they haven't done their minimal amount of research on the Mona Lisa. It's on a wooden board about this size. It's about the size of the real Mona Lisa on a wooden board, which of course does not roll up, does not fold. So you can tell that trick in movies. If it's not on a wooden board, they didn't do their research. And Leonardo took it with him all over the place, and it's hanging in Paris because the King of France hired Leonardo to do some work in his old age, and he left it there because it was one of his favorite paintings. He tinkered on it quite a while, and yeah. Another detail. There's more important details. There's a few more. What else? That one? Yeah.
The great eye contact.
Mm-hmm. What would you say? What?
The great eye contact.
The eye contact. Now, it's not really true that she follows you around the room.
Mm-hmm.
It sort of looks like that, but there are real paintings that do that and real tricks that do that. Particularly the first time it was really done effectively, it was in Disney's Haunted Mansion. Any of you go to Disney's Haunted Mansion? I went it the first year it was open, way back when. And I know the trick they used to get the faces to follow you, and that was creepy as hell. But yeah, great eye contact. She is still looking directly at us, bringing us into the picture. And the second thing I mentioned under that is her smile, her coy smile. There's all sorts of cartoons and jokes. I didn't include them. I decided not to, about what makes her smile, all sorts of things. It's a common use of cartoons. But so there's all sorts of things going on there. And for some reason, most people know this picture. And that's another thing we're doing in this course. I'm showing you some of the pictures of art that are just plain famous. That's why I say there are 25 works of art that you need to know. Some of them have stories that we'll talk about. She has no stories. Now you all know Mona Lisa, but she's instantly recognizable and instantly mockable, copyable, turnable, all sorts of ways. I should have put that up here. Now I have a handout for you. You can print out more of these on the web. Just follow the link on the syllabus. And it's something to keep in mind when you're looking at works of art. Another thing I'm trying to do in this class is to get you to really look at works of art, not just glance at them. Not just glance at them, but really look at them closely. You need one. Yeah, she's very generous. And you see the first question up there, just what is it, right? What's your first response to that question? What is it?
The Mona Lisa.
Okay. More broad? A painting. Okay? Both right answers. But if we're starting just from no information, if you didn't know it was the Mona Lisa, you would say, well, this is actually, of course, a video projection of what appears to be a painting. To be really picky. I guarantee you, again, as I said, it's a real piece of painting, painted on wood. I've seen it several times in the Louvre, in Paris. So, okay, so painting. How does it look? Now, part of that is what kind of painting is it? We already just mentioned. What kind of painting? A portrait. So the emphasis is on a person, or persons. Portraits, as I said, could be multiple. So the emphasis is on a particular person. And where is that person?
Centered.
Centered. What's in the background? Landscape. It's realistic. There's all sorts of things. We'll talk about some of this more in a moment. So there's also a way to describe how does it look. And then we can talk about what is the context. So in what situation, part of that might be the time period. What time period are we talking about? I mentioned Renaissance. And there are clues that is the Renaissance. Some of the kind of dress clothing she's wearing and the hairstyle, but also they often painted landscapes in the Renaissance like that, particularly after Leonardo showed them the way. And then, well, how good is it? And that is very subjective. Some pictures, like I said, people say, and that's why we use the cover of this book, Mona Lisa, one of the most famous paintings. And some people say it's a great painting. Other people say, well, you know, I know better, or I could do better. Well, not many people do better. But how good is it is subjective. So these are things that you would ask about, well, art. If you go into an art museum, trying to understand it, sometimes the labels on the pictures help. Sometimes the knowledge you bring into it, guidebooks, museum catalogs, all sorts of things help us to understand. And let's look at a picture from, well, our textbook, right? In the textbook. So if you have the textbook again, get it out. See if you can see, let's talk about it a little bit. So again, try to share if you don't have Excel, you can look at this. Or maybe you two can share. Get together. So it's on page X, it actually doesn't have a number, right? So, and it's also elsewhere in the book. It's so important, they have it 3 times in this book. Wow, if something's repeated 3 times in this book, it must be really important. So it's a famous painting by the artist, it's called Géricault, Frenchman, Raft of the Medusa. Again, what is a Medusa? I actually just said what a Medusa was. What is a Medusa?
Woman with snake hair.
A woman with snake hair from ancient Greco-Roman mythology. Except there's no woman with snake hair with Greco-Roman mythology. It's the name of a ship that sank that left a bunch of people on a raft. Now this is based on a real historical event. The artist read about this in the newspaper, thought it would make a great picture. The picture is about the size of this entire wall. It is huge. People are about life size almost. It's a huge picture. And the artist painted it, and well, what does your book have to say about it, right? So it describes some of that stuff, describes the context, and then on the other page, it lists these points to look at. So color, composition, mood, lighting, composition, movement, unity and balance, color and light, dark contrast, mood, things to look at. And these kind of things are also on that sheet I handed out. Ways to further in more detail describe some of that artwork you're looking at. Like the picture of the Pietà. How is color used in that picture? Do you remember? Yeah.
It's very dark surrounded.
The background is black, right? Does the background ever get black in real life?
No.
No, you can't see anything if it's black. Well, some modern blacks, actually there's a new black paint that is blacker than black.
What?
But not in the real world or anything like that, things don't get better. So a lot of dark and dark clothing of Mary and shadows and things like that. And then there was some huge flesh tone, so the naked Jesus with a lot of flesh, but blood splattered on him. So the lighting showed this bright flesh contrasted with this dark background. Real contrast in the lighting. What does the book say, and what do you see here about the lighting? What is illuminated, what is dark? Yeah.
Like the sea and the raft, like the people on the raft are kind of dark, and then like the skyline beyond is
Okay, so
illuminated.
there's a lot of people in the dark, but also some flesh highlighted. But the sea is dark. We have storm clouds over here that is dark. The sail is dark. This sky is dark. But we got this huge band of probably setting sun. It's about to become night, probably. So use of light is chosen, not all universally illuminated. The light is chosen to go in certain places. And again, some of the people are highlighted, some are left more obscure. So the composition. What would you say the composition is like? Again, the portraits I showed you before, those things, the composition was, well, figures, mostly vertical, right? So Mary and Jesus were vertical. The David was a little bit twisted because of his capturing his motion. Perseus was just standing there, mostly vertical, although with one arm out, and the sword creating a bit of horizontal movement. What is the composition of this, would you say?
It's like
Where is
over
it
there
going?
in triangles.
Lots of triangles. Here's a picture that illustrates
Oh
that.
wow.
So an artist went and said, you know, let's draw all the lines of movement in this painting. And so it just takes lines like this line along the leg and just continues it all the way. Well, it goes right to this corner. That leg over there is a direct line to that corner. That's obviously an artistic choice, right? An artist chose that. Or this arm, he's raising his arm again, boom, goes to this corner. So a lot of the direction is going to this corner. Others are going this way. So look at all these lines in this triangle highlighting this guy who's waving the flag. Why do you think he's waving, or piece of cloth? Why is he waving this piece of cloth?
Signal.
For a tiny little ship you can't even see barely. tiny, can't see it, off in the distance.
Oh.
They finally find the ship that is gonna rescue them because they're there, and people, these kind of people, most horizontal, they're dead or dying. People died on this raft. No water, no food, they were just left adrift by the people who ran the boat. The boat itself sort of cracked, but they took the lifeboats, left them, these people, a raft. And then people are struggling, reaching, pointing, collapsing, dying, so there's a mixture of all sorts of lines. The sail creates its own line, bringing us into this figure 2. So look how this figure is sort of the centerpiece, because he's the hope, he's the life. If they don't see his signal, they'll die. Fortunately, they did. That's the story back. The ship was, the raft was rescued, and then they sued the ship owners for abandoning them. That's the reality. But it creates a dramatic picture, all these lines going in all sorts of different directions, right? So that's a complex composition, right? So another thing you could use, remember those words, or here in this art format thing, the kind of words that we can use to describe these things. So let's again look at them in a little bit more detail. Any comments or questions about this painting? And we'll see it again because it's mentioned 3 times in the book. So put it in its historical context, it's part of the Romantic era. Its story is real history, and we'll see it again. Okay, so let's break these things down a little bit about what I call an art query, asking questions about a piece of art. To really understand it, sort of take it apart. The same way you would analyze a football game. What are the basic elements of a football game? Those of you who play football? Elements of a football game. What?
Film.
I can't hear you.
Film.
No, film is how we see it. What are the elements of the actual game as it's played?
Teams on offense, teams on defense.
2 teams, offense, defense, alternating. Good. Another element. Where do they play?
Field.
A field, a set space in which they're not allowed to leave, like the frame of a picture. Okay? What else is part of football? Positions. They're assigned specific positions, but they're often not supposed to deviate. Well, unless they need to, they deviate from those positions. Good. What else? Yeah?
A goal.
The goal. So the point of the game is to get that ball through a particular goalpost, one at either end. What role does color play in the game?
What?
Color.
Each team has a
Different
different one.
teams.
Each team has a different color. And what color is the field?
Green,
And
Flags.
white.
white and
Penalties.
yellow flags and red flags, stuff like that. Checkered
Scoreboard.
referees, right? So there's color involved in a football game, right? It helps you tell things apart. Who's on which team, etc. And how else do you tell the players apart?
Numbers.
Numbers and names on their jerseys.
Scoreboard.
Scoreboard keeping track of it all. Who's ahead, who's behind. So to understand football, you break it down. Of course, there are then the playbook. You know, different plays that are made, and some are famous. Have you seen that Geico commercial with Peyton Manning and Brad Paisley talking about football plays reflecting in shirt? Nobody's seen that one.
There's like flea flickers.
Flea
run-
flicker.
run
It's like,
pass
I had to look it up.
options,
What's a
and-
flea flicker? And the other 2 are football plays that are sort of standard plays. I don't know because I don't really follow football, but I know other people do. So talk about football.
I love football.
And that's why it's a multi-billion-dollar industry.
I
And
love
football attracts more Americans on a Sunday than art museums. You'll find me more likely in an art museum than a football museum. But understanding it, I know enough about football to be conversant with it, to follow game, to know what's going on, right? I'm trying to get you to know enough about art to follow it and know what's going on. You don't have to love it after this class the way I do, but just so you know, and you're educated as a result. So, these questions, what is it? What kind of things we talk about with what is it? And one of the major things we talk about is the medium. Like I mentioned before, technically these are video projections, but video projections of paintings, drawings, and sculptures. And paintings, drawings, and sculptures use different media. The media, like somebody mentioned the media, you know, now it's film and video and stuff like that. The media back then were, again, physical objects. Fresco, as I said, is plaster on which tempera paint is painted. Tempera is a special kind of paint that has a more specialized use nowadays. Most of you probably haven't used tempera at all. Most paints these days are oil or latexes, or as kids you probably played with watercolor, or most modern painters use acrylics, which again is based on a certain kind of plastic. Tempera was based on ground up powders from plants and stones and things like that back then. And so fresco and tempera go together. Modern versions are for canvas and oil and, well, even painting houses and stuff like that. So the media sometimes reflects it, and different paint mediums give different reflections. Like, how many of you still have an old CRT TV? Anyone still have? How many of you have a new Pixel Ultra big 4HK TV? Compare the two. You get a different quality picture. Or compare many shows, TV shows. Some are filmed on video, some are filmed digital now, some are filmed on, well, film. And the quality of those pictures changes depending on the medium that they're using. It's the same with the medium you're using here. Now, sometimes it's an important thing, sometimes less so. I'm just trying to tell you some of the stuff that's going on. Okay, so, and what are they painting on? Again, fresco on plaster, tempera is particularly with plaster, and oil, watercolors on paper, canvas, wood canvas, paper, watercolors on paper, mostly acrylic. Can be painted on anything practically, as can oil. And as I said, Mona Lisa is painted on a wood board. After the Renaissance, most paintings today are painted on canvas. And this was made from plant fibers that are woven together to create a smooth surface covered with a compound, something sometimes called gesso or other things like that. Create a smooth surface and then paint it on top of that, put in a wooden frame that's usually square, maybe round, rectangular. So for painting, that's that. For drawing, again, particularly on canvas, you can draw on canvas of paper and use chalk, pencil, ink. Woodcuts and engravings are used carved in metal, where people take tools to make dents in the metal or impressions in the metal or raise metal that then smear ink on the metal and then pressed on the canvas or particularly the paper to sometimes parchment to create drawings. And it's usually, again, just one simple color, most drawings, but sometimes they'll add colors, paint them in afterwards. And then of course finally sculptures, which, you know, made out of metal, wood, stone, glass, ceramics, or mixtures of them all. So those are the most important mediums. Now, for our purposes, you know, I don't know how you often need to pay that much attention to these things, but we'll mention them, and sometimes it does affect how they look. Another part of it is, again, what is it? What are they showing? And there are first three kinds of categories of stories. If it's going to have a story, like the Mona Lisa, remember, doesn't have a story. It's just a portrait. We'll get there in a second. But there are secular stories related to, again, fiction, nonfiction, things that aren't religious. So secular is basically not religious. And stories that really happened, in air quotes, in history. Like the Raft of the Medusa is an historical painting. It is an incident that really happened, whereas sometimes the people paint historical paintings and they're just making stuff up.
Wait, what?
What? Did you say something?
Did you say,
They make stuff up, historical paintings, sometimes.
what'd you say, Medusa was real?
No, she's a secular, or you could say it's religious. Greco-Roman mythology was their religion.
Mm-hmm.
In my last two classes, Mr. Mitch gonna remember, I brought up Santa Claus. Is Santa Claus real?
Hell yeah.
My grandpa looks like Santa Claus.
I've played Santa.
Little kids always think he's Santa Claus, and he always walks around. He'll be like, oh, hoo, 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 and he'll like play along with it.
Oh, that's
wonderful.
cute.
But is he real? And how many of you were told Santa Claus was real when you were little? Whether you believe it or not, that's up to you. But most people say it's a lie. People making money off of it.
Yeah.
So where does that fit in? And a lot of art is devoted to Santa Claus. There's a whole history of the iconic images of Santa Claus. And especially the original saints on which he's based, which we won't cover in this class, but some of you could write on the original St. Nicholas. He's one of those options.
Huh?
Original pictures. And how the picture is portrayed. So landscape, still life, and portrait. Those are the three main ways to illustrate something. And landscape is obviously the main point is, well, trees and oceans and mountains and stuff like that. Still life is like bowls of fruit. Many art students are forced to spend lots of time, draw the bowl of fruit, and make it as realistic, or as modern art comes in, as unrealistic as possible. And portraits. And then I just put here symbols, and that's what this book is about. It's in the title. Dictionary of subjects, so things that are symbols, and symbols in art. So this handy dictionary, as you saw in your syllabus, there are a number of terms you have to look up and read, a number you don't. And this describes a lot of the stuff that you will come across in, well, any art history book or any museum, describing the basic story. We'll also read the primary sources of most of the stories, so to get the general and full story. And what symbols are in stories and what they're supposed to mean. Like that, I mentioned that wooden beam behind Mary and Jesus was probably the cross, the base of the cross. And what does the cross mean? We'll talk about that. Or a sword. What does a sword mean? In a sense, I said the sword covered his genitals, but in many ways, swords are replacements for genitals, particularly male genitalia.
What?
Well, we'll talk about stuff like that. And, well, the handbook helps you with that. And then it might be a specific subject or title, right? We talked about the first story was about David without Goliath, but it's a David and Goliath story. It's a David story, or again, a Jesus story, but with Mary, the Pietà, or Perseus story, subject and title. Our second question, how does it look? Second big question. Format, size, shape. Like I said, the raft of the Medusa. Now it's in a big room in the Louvre, so it's in a big room with lots of other big paintings. So I think it loses some of its intimidation because it's in a big room with lots of other big paintings. So it all depends on how a museum decides to show something sometimes. Some big paintings get their own rooms, and they clearly dominate. Or I just read a review of the movie First Man. It's about Neil Armstrong landing on the moon, which really happened, of course. And the guy recommended you have to see this in the movie theater. If you watch it on a smaller TV, it's not going to affect you in the same way. Another movie like that, have you seen Gravity? Sandra Bullock? Gravity?
Yeah.
You see it in a movie theater or on TV?
DVD.
Watch it in a movie theater, which you can't because it only limited play. But it's just overwhelming in a movie theater. Just overwhelming. And the same they say about First Man. Just some things the size, or if you get to an IMAX theater, how many have seen an IMAX movie of some kind, right? That's one reason why they make IMAX movies, just overwhelming. What did you see? What movie did you see? Did you raise your hand? No, you didn't? No?
So I did.
Deadpool and IMAX? That must be hilarious.
I didn't pay for the IMAX, but saw it.
Oh, well, but you don't have to tell me that. Who else has seen IMAX movie? What did you see?
Deadpool, Lion King.
The new one.
Yes.
I saw like Apollo 11 at the Ben Franklin Institute.
That's a documentary they made for the Institute. Yeah,
And
that's.
a panda.
I've seen some nature stuff. That's the only time I've seen an IMAX movie is in a museum like that. I haven't paid for any.
They
We
have
don't-
a thing
we don't
in
have any
theaters
nearby.
now that you can do, like, you can pay a price for the month.
Yeah.
It's like $18 and you can see as many movies as you want.
Where is
Really?
this?
I know in Dixon City, Regal has $18 a month. You remember what
The
hers
Dixon
cost?
City Regal, really? And they have an IMAX
$18 a
theater?
month, so like we went to go see 2 movies and it'd be $10 each movie.
Yeah.
And so we already made our money back and they give you 10% on every like food and drink buy.
And Dixon City has an IMAX?
Yeah,
the
they
Regal.
made a new one a couple of months ago.
It's
Really?
by Kohl's and by Five
Well,
Below.
and I know where it is, yeah. I've been.
That's
I
crazy.
don't think I've actually been there for movies.
But $18 a month,
Yeah,
and you can go see a movie for
Cinemark
free.
now is, of course, the big lounge chairs.
Yeah.
Probably so much worse than that.
I only know the
That's a drop.
$5
So,
Tuesdays.
This is closer, and it's free now.
Well, for me,
Yeah.
Cinemark's closer. Easiest is the Wilkes-Barre, and when I was a kid, or when my
Yeah.
kids were growing up, was the Gateway across the river.
Oh yeah.
Oh, the
I
sticky
remember the-
floors,
I
the
remember the
rickety
Gateway.
chairs, midnight showings of Lord of the Rings. Oh, wow, those were good times. Lord of the Rings should be seen full size.
The drive-in's the best though. The drive-in in
Really? Yeah.
Hemlock Creek. Oh my gosh, it's
Hemlock
awesome.
Creek? I've
Yeah.
Never been
driven
there.
since I was a kid.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. They still have it and it's like up and running too.
Yeah.
I just went there like
I go to
2 weeks
Circle.
ago.
So sometimes how you see the art, like movies, affects the impression you have. And a lot of people, go to the Louvre for Mona Lisa. And as I said, she's only the size, let me take my book back, where's my book? She's only the size, again, of this book. So it's a little picture bigger than this picture, certainly a lot smaller than the projected picture, but she's only about this size. And in the middle of a wall by herself, behind protective glass and behind ropes, so nobody gets near her because people tried to damage her. Which is to me is one of the worst crimes against humanity, is to damage works of art. But how museums set it up or not really depends. How you see it like that. The David statue is in a fancy room with a few other statues in this old villa in Rome. I'm not sure where the Pieta painting is. And Perseus is in a loggia, an open-air place with a bunch of other sculptures in the heart of the city of Florence. So they have a couple of statues of naked men and women in the heart of the city, where all the tourists and their little kids come. They don't care. Nudity, can deal with it. The Italians do. Size, shapes, life size, smaller than life size, bigger than life size, and all those things factor into it, and how it works. Composition, so negative space versus positive space. And you have things like balance, symmetry, and asymmetry. Like in the Perseus was mostly balanced. He was poised, standing on his feet, pretty stable. People weren't going to knock him over. David was in the middle of a swing. Mona Lisa's just sitting there. The raft, that was full of all sorts of action and movement and tension. So a lot of asymmetry. It wasn't balanced. There were angles, right? It wasn't the same. You couldn't divide it in half and be fairly equally. So, and negative space versus positive space. The painting of the Pieta, the black is negative space. The figures were positive space. The negative space, there's nothing much going on there. And it uses to affect our viewing of the positive space. And sometimes there's the rule of thirds. Yeah, okay, we are where we are. Rule of thirds, we'll see that in a second. And again, movement, pattern, harmony, rhythm, dominance, clutter, these are words you can use, particularly with paintings that have a lot of things like the word you might use, you know, for the raft of the Medusa is clutter, you know, there's a lot of cluttered bodies all over it, or a pattern, you know, arcing in a big triangle towards the guy holding the waving cloth. Certainly not stillness with all the waves and the clouds and such like that, whereas the Pieta was very still. No movement necessarily. The David was a moment, not still. He's got movement in there, even though it's captured in a moment. He's about to swing, as opposed to Michelangelo's David, which we'll see, he could have been standing there for minutes for all we know. This David is about to swing like a pitcher about to throw a ball. Okay, so here's negative and positive space, a useful illustration. What do you see?
Reflection.
Do you?
That's what I see.
What do you
Me
see?
too.
A reflection, possibly. Depends on.
Or an urn. Okay, it depends on what, do you see the urn, or do you see the two faces reflecting each other? Or do you see both, because they're both there?
Oh, whoa.
Whoa!
Wait, what?
Yeah!
Seen this before?
Wow!
No.
So which are you supposed to see? This is an optical illusion. It's a trick. It's supposed to say, okay, what's there? Two faces or an urn? A pot, right? With a big base and a big opening for flowers, or two faces. A little arrow, that's a little bit of distraction. And that's again an issue of composition and what they're trying to create and how they're trying to see what do they want you to look at. This is a trick to tease you. But as I said, negative space and positive space is to get you to look at the right place in a painting. And so something to pay attention to. Where is the part you should ignore? Describing the Pieta, you could have said easily, there's all this black surrounding them, emphasizing the white flesh and the bright light. That's a positive, and this it's too. You want to see the urn? It's a big white thing with blue useless space around it. Or again, you just change your brain, and as optical illusions are hilarious. Change your brain, you see the one with the plates, you look for the plates that are flipped, and if you see one plate the wrong way, all of them suddenly reverse. It's freaky weird optical illusions. Our brains are strange things sometimes. So negative space versus positive. So this is, again, about composition, and this is about unbalance and symmetry and the rule of thirds. Many paintings are composed to show, well, and divided in thirds. Draw three lines. Vertical thirds, horizontal thirds. And notice where the statistics are. 40% people will put the main thing you're looking at right here. 25% here, 20% here, 14% here. Our eyes just naturally go to those places in a rectangular box like that, which is what our TVs are, right? And our picture frames, our TVs are based on our picture frames. So often the most important thing is right there. And test it with other pictures we'll see this semester. Is the most important place right there. Or you put the horizon line in one of these two places, right? The horizons, where the earth ends in the distance. Where'd you want to put it? In the Raft of Jericho, the horizon line is up here. In other paintings, it'd be down here. And where's the guy waving the flag? Where is he almost exactly? Right there. That's not bad. The artist is rejecting it, whereas the space over here is sort of blank in the Raft of Jericho. So you don't have to obey that rule. You can break the rules. This gives you tendency. If you want a balanced, symmetric, and a focused picture, well, and you can do this when you're taking pictures with your iPhones or real cameras. How many of you have real cameras anymore? Do you have real cameras? Okay. With iPhones, a lot of people don't use them. I use both. Composition. Movement versus stillness, right? Now, are either of these moving? No.
Yeah.
Does one of them illustrate movement? Yes. By showing the angle of the body, and here we got little movement lines like they use in cartoons. So it's a captured moment, but it's trying to illustrate movement versus stillness to somebody that's stably standing there on the plane. So again, those three pictures I showed you at the beginning, and David was moving some, the other two are pretty much still. You can use that to describe pictures. And pattern, rhythm, harmony, dominance, clutter, those kind of things too. Perspective. So it took a while for artists to figure out that the two eyes that most of us have create stereoscopic vision, which makes things look like they disappear in all sorts of lines going to a vanishing point. That looks like if we draw two straight lines, like some of those lines on the painting of the Jericho I showed, they seem to come to a point in the distance. They don't really. It looks that way. It's again an optical illusion of our brains. But we're so used to seeing it. Before the artists figured this out, many paintings that were developed before the vanishing point, the distant things look a little strange or bizarre, not quite accurate. Children's drawings are often the same way, things like that. There's horizontal, vertical lines, foreground, middle, advancing, receding. Let's look at some examples. So this is a nice little illustration of how the vanishing point works. If you draw a cube, you draw the lines of a cube so that there are lines that go from where they draw further to all uniting in the far distance. It looks like that. In proper geometry, they go on infinitely apart, because a cube has perfectly parallel lines. If you study your Euclidean geometry, parallel lines never meet in real life. But it looks like they go to a vanishing point on the horizon line, where the horizon meets. And so again, where you put that horizon matters. Or here's a real life example you're all familiar with. Railroad tracks. How many of you stood in the middle of a railroad tracks and look in the distance? It looks like it comes to a point. Do they really? Of course not. They go on forever parallel. But our stereoscopic eyes and our brain, as it's evolved, see them like they go to a vanishing point in the distance. And some artists use this as an artistic technique, either just to pay attention to, like your Mona Lisa book says, right on the cover, one of the things that said, nobody brought it up, but busy background, jagged peaks, winding roads, receding waters, single vanishing point perspective. But as I look at this picture, there's nothing that makes me think of the vanishing point. You know, there's no sharp angles, no window frame, even the arm of her chair doesn't take us back there. The background doesn't do it. There's no vanishing point that is created to my eye in this picture. Other paintings do have objects, structures, backgrounds that point to a vanishing point. So perspective again. And another form of perspective, there's another kind. Is there depth to this picture? No, it's all flat, right? It's all flat. But do we see and perceive depth? This guy looks closer, this guy looks middle distance, that guy looks far away. Because they're all the same shape, we think they should be the same size, And so our brains tell us there's a distance thing going on here. It's not real. It's what our brains do in understanding perspective. So things in the foreground, of course, larger and bigger, the middle ground, and then the background. And usually the most important things are in the foreground, but sometimes an artist will play with the rules and put the most important thing in the background, like the story that's being told. The foreground might be filled with all sorts of other characters that the artist just wanted to paint, maybe some fun animals or something. And then Adam and Eve are way in the background. But it's Adam and Eve that are the important part of the story. So artists play with these things. And remember, it's an illusion. It's an illusion. It's a trick of our eyes and brain that artists learn and use, well, to make their points. Horizontal, vertical, diagonal, it's all part of this. These are a bit diagonal, but they could be horizontal or vertical. Advancing, receding, it's all part of these illusions. Color and light. So these are different ways to describe color and light. So again, these are words I'm giving you, vocabulary words that you use in your descriptions of works of art. Intense. The flesh of that Jesus I thought was rather intense, whereas the color of Mary's cloak was rather cool, literally cool blue. But you could make her cloak bright blue, rabbit blue, pop the painting blue, and some people do. So the intensity of light, whether it's warm or cool, but literally, warm colors tend to be red, and it's because of the visible spectrum, and cool colors tend to be blue, violet, indigo, violet, again, colors of the spectrum, based on how metal heats up. And monochrome, and statues are, of course, monochrome. They're usually carved out of one material. The first David was out of marble. The Perseus was out of bronze. The bronze creates some sort of weathering, creates different tones to different parts of the picture, and that was actually an older picture of the Perseus. They took him out for several years, rebuffed him all up, got rid of all the green, put him back, he was bronze colored. Well, now he's turning green again, because that's what happens to bronze when you put it outdoors. And again, the light source. You have, and again, contrast with bright and dark. The Raft of the Medusa had real contrast of colors. Some warm, light flesh. The horizon was lit up by the setting sun. The clouds, the sea, the shadows of the bodies, dark. Whereas, and again, the Jesus and Mary were fairly well lit up, the rest dark. Sculptures sort of just have, well, what they can do with the physical body of the light source and where you shine it. Although many sculptures are designed to be seen from the front. But sometimes I'll show you pictures, because when I go to museums, I'll just simply walk around the sculpture and take some pictures, which you don't find in the art books very much. But I've been to a lot of these museums, so you see some of the rear ends, including literal rear ends of some of these sculptures in this glass, because you can walk around them. The rear ends are there. They're to be looked at. If they're not meant to be looked at, the sculptures are put in a niche, a little carving, or against the wall, a little hollowed out space, and then you're not allowed or able to walk around them. I don't walk around them. I walk around them. But generally the light source for a sculpture, that says, is just simply one, and the material is monochrome itself. But with paintings, particularly chiaroscuro is the Italian term for using light and shadow, and particularly the more detailed term, and we'll talk about this again, is sfumato. Particularly with Leonardo, he creates this sort of soft, hazy film, which of course nowadays you can do by taking a picture like smearing some oil on the lens, or just putting it slightly out of focus. But Mona Lisa seems to be in a slight soft light. She's got some sharp shadows, but they're softened by the sfumato technique. And again, most of her is dark, but her flesh, her face and upper chest are very bright. So highlights and spotlights, her face and upper chest are highlighted, the rest much less so. So choices artist makes. The background could be highlighted, although that distracts from the foreground. And hazy sharp, as I said, she's a little soft focus. A lot of old actresses now, and the sharpness of big screen TVs or film in big theaters, sometimes they put things a little out of focus to remove some of the wrinkles and warts and such like that famous people have. So describe this for me. What do you see here? What kind of picture is it? It's a portrait, okay? Just focusing on a person. What do you think is the medium? Painting. Probably a painting. Now, a video projection of a painting. Who is it? How do you know that?
I took art class.
You took art class.
Yeah.
How would other people know that, perhaps?
She has a primary.
Yes, good. And there's another reason?
It's famous.
Because she has a movie and a book about her. Anybody see the movie or the book, The Girl with the Pearl Earring? No? Who plays it? The woman who plays Black Widow. Scarlett Johansson. Famous actor. How many have heard of Scarlett Johansson? Got a major motion picture. Well, it's a minor motion picture. It's one of those art movies that they show in art houses and not major films. Well, the Cinemark sometimes shows art movies. So she portrays, you can find a picture of her on the internet. Google in Girl with the Pearl Earring. You might show Scarlett Johansson posed like that instead of this painting. So that's what draws your attention, right? How many of you noticed that pearl earring? Look how the light makes that pop, right? Now it's just above her collar, which is also white, but it's surrounded by this other darkness, this dark shadow, and the collar in a sense creates a foundation for the earring, so it creates a frame for it. So it pops. It also echoes, of course, her eyes and the spots of light on her irises. So we have light, white, 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 playing with the white color there.
There's white on her lip.
What's that?
White on her
The
lip.
glisten. The glisten on her lip.
The glisten on her lip. The actress in the movie, the painter tells the poser to wet your lips, and apparently Scarlett made the decision not to lick her lips, but to suck her lip. Which one is sexier?
Sucking.
Yes. An artistic choice, right? I just knew that because I read about the film. And I like the film. I watch historical movies. I like Scarlett Johansson. And yes, that sparkle on the lips draws your attention to those lips. Absolutely. And she's, of course, like Mona Lisa, looking at us. That's her engaging us in that picture. So how is the light used? So all this dark, artificially dark. You know, the artist, she was probably standing in front of a wall or sitting in front of a wall. He didn't paint the wall, he just painted darkness. Light coming in from this direction, you know, spots on the eyes from some sort of spotlight is hitting her face. That's why she has those two little dots on her eyes of light reflecting that. Catching the earring here and her collar here, but fighting into shadow here with the shadow of her neck. Color? Yeah?
Her head coloring, like the blue is very like intense, whereas like the yellowish looking thing is a lot softer.
And those are complementary colors. I'm not going to go into whole things about color wheels and complementary colors, but colors balance each other. They're called complementary. And they add to each color's strength. And football teams often choose complementary colors for their jerseys, or every sports teams. There are usually two colors, right? Maybe three colors with the white lettering or gold lettering, depending. But most sports teams have a dark color and a light color. They're also complementary. And there's a whole study, whole color charts and color wheels you can use to find these. And these are nicely, the blue, which of course has different bright blue here, shading into dark blue, light blue here, shading into white, and light tan, dark tan, shading into darkness. So excellent use of color in simple color, few colors. Another picture of a queen might have her royal robes with dozens of colors on there, with fancy embroidery and gold and lots of pearls. Not just one simple pearl earring with a pearl and a piece of metal, I think it is. Or maybe it's two pearls, a larger pearl and a smaller pearl. It's hard to tell from this painting, and I forget from the movie. Okay? So, with this, and we get a lot of ideas about color and light. I was just saying, so is this intense? Some of the intense is some of the color in this picture is intense. Some of it's negative. The black is negative. Warm and cool. Some parts are warm. Shadowed parts cool. It's definitely not monochrome, but it's not, you know, really intense either. It's very flat colors, largely. Light source, clearly one light source hitting her from one direction, showing a lot of contrast, brightness and darkness. Chiaroscuro is again contrasting, particularly on skin, light and shadow, which she has. Again, very light here, a little bit of shadow on the nose, but then going into the cheek and the neck, very deep shadow, chiaroscuro. So the shadow, highlights, and spotlights. And focus, it's a little bit off focus. It's a little bit soft. It's not precise, it's not like the most sharp HD picture. It's softened, smoothed out, gentle. And then texture, depending on, often, too far. Particularly sculptures, some, like some of Michelangelo's most famous sculptures were left unfinished. And some people say, well, did he just get bored? Or did he like it unfinished, sort of rough and not smoothed out? And same thing with paintings, particularly with oil painting. You just it's modern acrylic painting, you just slather on the paint and build up layers, some of them very thick and some very thin. So some paintings actually have real depth and texture physically to the paint. It's either thicker or thinner. Of course, again, wooden sculptures or marble sculptures, smoothed out or not. So context, style, period, artist, and original setting. Now, one of the things I'm going to want you to try to do well on is be able to tell a painting that's like from the Renaissance versus the Baroque versus the Romantic period. So some styles, and I list the styles you need to know and the ways the styles are described. You could have read about them for today. I want you to try to learn those styles. And we'll talk about them again starting next week as we'll run through art history. The artists, I would want you, and as I already said, you need to know 25 famous artists. Yeah, 25 famous artists. I give you the list. They're intelligent people should know. The list is online. You can start looking them up. You can go to websites and find all sorts of dozens of pictures by them and thorough biographies and stuff like that. But just recognize their names, when they worked, and what kind of paintings or sculptures they did. And all these details you don't need to know. But you really understand a painting, how and when and where it was done. And then its original setting, like in Mona Lisa, was Leonardo's private little painting. The girl with the pearl earring, we're not sure what purpose it was for. The movie designs its own purpose for it. It wound up, I think, in some private collection somewhere. Now it's some public collection. Sometimes patrons hire people to paint pictures, and the movie shows, again, sort of his own private work. But he's painting other things for patrons on purpose. Some things we know, some we don't. And then, how good is it? That question. And that's aesthetics. And the three components of aesthetics, or the method of developing how something good is. Craftsmanship, how much work went into it. All of you, I'm sure, have drawn drawings as a kid in kindergarten. Is there a lot of craftsmanship that goes into those pictures? No, because you don't know much. You don't know much. That doesn't mean they can't be good. They can't be meaningful. They can be, especially for parents. I still have pictures my kids drew. And the attraction, how much people actually like the picture. Some things you go, oh, that's ugly, or there's not enough interest in. Others say, wow. Somehow, some people are a lot of interest in looking, staring at the Mona Lisa, and how successful it is. Mona Lisa is successful. So some examples for each. Two crosses. Which one had more craftsmanship going into it?
Right.
It's pretty obvious, isn't it? One just two simple lines. The other, look at that cross, and it's actually about that size. Look at all these gems, an ancient Roman cameo, so the stone carved to create that face. Gold all over it, and oh man. Craftsmanship. Some things are very simple, some things take a hell of a lot of work. That doesn't mean one's good or bad, just ways to describe them. Or how much you appreciate it or not, just two smiley faces. You know, smiley faces is not a Walmart symbol. It's a peace symbol from the 60s that was out of copyright. The guy who invented the smiley face said, I'm not going to copyright or trademark it. The world can use it. So Walmart stole it to use for their commercials for years.
Yikes.
So any of you can use it. And on that goes the frowny face too. If you like it or don't, you know, that's up to you whether you like something. That's up to you. And how successful is it? Mona Lisa is so successful, she needs shades when she goes out in public. People say, aren't you Mona Lisa? And she said, no, that's not me. Or maybe actually it is, she's using the shades to draw more attention. Now Mona Lisa has all sorts of imitations. It says there's so many cartoons, so many versions. I thought of putting out some of them. I'll just put out actually the most famous version of Mona Lisa is this one,
Really?
by a real artist for a real purpose. By Marcel Duchamp. We'll hear about it again with modern art. And what did he do? He just drew a mustache on him. Called the painting LHOOQ, which meaningless symbols, except if you pronounce it in French, it's a slang word for a woman's genitalia. And he just wrote his name under it of this postcard that he bought and said, slapped it on a wall and said, "This is art." Is it?
Could be.
He says so, and this is worth millions of dollars. Not as much as the real Mona Lisa, but this costs millions of dollars because people say, that's art, that's valuable, we want to pay to see that, pay to own it, pay to have it there. Art is subjective, and particularly what you like or not. You might think that's silly. You could say, I could do that, and you could. Any of you could do that. Draw a mustache on Mona Lisa and write a couple letters. Of course you could. But his purpose was also to say and ask, what is art? How do we think about it? How do we use it? How do we buy and sell it? And those are things you think about all of art. Now in this class, I'm forcing you to learn some artists and some works of art and the stories connected with them, because I think they're a big part of our civilization. I also think they're fun and interesting, and again, to make you better educated people, to be consumers of art. When you leave this class, maybe you won't spend your Sundays in an art museum like I will, and you'll go to the football game. But this class can help you go to those museums and appreciate better, or buy books, or just run across it in media, as art sometimes is, like in major motion pictures, like Girl with the Earring and the Pearl Earring. That's what we do. Okay? So keep up with your reading. Start
Yeah.
history, starting with the first human art next week, and start galloping for 2 weeks through all of our history.